Hello and welcome to the Sunday Guardian show by Joyeeta Basu. Viewers, at a time and when international politics is geopolitics, I would rather say, is literally going up in flames with all sorts of things that are happening in terms of Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, and Hamas versus Israel. The United Nations, UNGA, is going on when I'm recording this. To talk about this, I thought this program can be kind of divided in three segments. We are going to talk about Israel now first, in terms of the declaration of Palestine as an independent state by countries like Britain, France, and others, what it means in terms of geopolitics, what it means in terms of the second part of the Abraham Accords. Then we are going to talk a bit about Saudi-Pakistan deal that has come into effect. And lastly, it has direct, I would say, correlation with India-U.S. relations. Now, for this, I have got a very special guest from the USA. He's Jason Isaacson, who is Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer at the very influential global advocacy organization of the Jewish people, the American Jewish Committee. He is a longtime observer of Middle Eastern politics and was also one of the main people behind the signing of the Abraham Accord 5 years ago. You know about the Abraham Accord, which brought Israel, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. These are the countries that signed the accord about normalizing relations. And AJC, and especially Jason Isaacson, is also very supportive of India-U.S. relations. Welcome, Jason, to the show.
No, it's good to be here, Joyeeta. Thank you.
The first question, Jason, what is going on in terms of this? Suddenly, we see even Britain writing things like Jerusalem as not Israel, it is writing Palestine. And then there is this Macron getting into a tiff with, I would say, disagreement with the US in terms of declaring a Palestinian state. What exactly is going on in this respect?
Well, I think there are several things that are going on. It's very disturbing, and it will not advance the prospect of Israeli-Palestinian peace. It will not improve the lives of the Palestinian people, if that is the intention. It is clearly a political message to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Israeli government. It's clearly a message of dissatisfaction with the course that Israel is pursuing in its self-defense against terror. The terrible destruction that's being wrought in Gaza, precisely because Hamas has chosen to embed itself in a civilian population in a way that is impossible to defeat unless there is a good deal of damage done to the infrastructure of Gaza, which is where Hamas has placed itself and placed the citizens of Gaza, the Palestinian population, the innocent Palestinian population that is being used as human shields by Hamas. And the conduct of the war, which has been going on now for almost 2 years, is very painful to watch. And it's horrible what is happening to the Palestinian people who were put in that place cynically by Hamas. And there's dissatisfaction with not only the course of conduct of Israel in Gaza, but also statements that are being made by Israeli officials about the West Bank, about annexation, about the impossibility of a Palestinian state. All of these send signals to the rest of the world that we don't care what you think. We're pursuing our own course, and therefore the world is reacting. And so you're seeing country after country, including friends of Israel, including countries that really understand the threat that Israel faces and the necessity of defeating Hamas and other terror groups. But they are nevertheless, because of their own populations, rising up and demanding a change of policy or a signal of some sort. We find ourselves in this situation. Look, we want the war to end. We want the hostages to come home. There are 48 Israelis and others, actually, who have been held now for almost 2 years in the most brutal captivity. Half of them, more than half, are probably dead, but there are at least 20 supposedly who are still alive. That has to end. This is brutal and it's horrible. And people have to understand the trauma that this has inflicted on the Israeli society. 1,200 people being killed, 251 taken hostage. No country would tolerate that, would only India and every other country would react with fury against those who were conducting that kind of offense against population. So the war has to end. The hostages have to come home. Hamas can no longer be in power in Gaza. But how all of that happens because of declarations at the United Nations General Assembly by countries saying they are recognizing a non-existent Palestinian state is mystifying to me. It one doesn't track with the other. If you want to see a Palestinian state, great. Let's build the political support among the Palestinian people. Let's build the institutions that will make it a successful state, not a failed state. Let's make sure there are security conditions that are met. Let's make sure that the Palestinian population is not, the children of the Palestinian population are not brought up to believe that their pathway to heaven lies through killing Jews. If we can make all of these changes in the educational system, in the governance of the Palestinian people, providing the necessary security arrangements, then let's move toward a Palestinian state. But that's a process, and it's going to be a long process, but we're committed to it, and the United States has long been committed to it, and I know India is committed to the achievement of a successful Palestinian state, but it's not going to happen with this kind of shortcut that we're seeing at the United Nations.
So, do you think, as you're talking about, Benjamin Netanyahu could have handled this better? Or the
You're
Israeli
asking,
government, if I can say that, could have handled the situation, the Gaza situation better?
look, Hamas purposely and cynically engineered what happened on October 7th, knowing that Israel would react with fury and enormous force. The region knew that. I was speaking with Saudi officials just after October 7th, and they completely understood this was all about stopping the course of normalization that was racing across the region. The Saudis were close to a deal with Israel at that point. You may remember in early October, late September, early October of 2023, we were getting very close. And Hamas knew that by reacting, by acting the way it did, inflicting the enormous casualties and atrocities in Israel, Israel would react with enormous force, which would cause immense damage in Gaza, which would therefore freeze the process. It would incite fury against Israel across the Arab world and anger, disappointment with Israel elsewhere in the world, and that would stop this process of normalization, which Iran wanted to stop and Hamas very definitely wanted to stop. How could Israel have reacted in a different way? Look, I'm afraid that the world has the impression, and I believe the region especially has the impression, that because of Israel's enormous success in targeting its enemies surgically, ingeniously, the planting of tiny bombs in pagers and Hezbollah for Hezbollah commanders and fighters, so that all of a sudden a signal could go off and lots of Hezbollah fighters are suddenly eliminated off the battlefield, and placing a bomb in a guest house, in a particular room in a guest house in Tehran, so that when a Hamas leader is in Tehran for consultations, it blows up. That kind of precision, that kind of ingenuity, that kind of advanced planning, I believe that the region has come to expect, maybe the world has come to expect, that if Israel has enemies, it finds them very precisely, very surgically. They're not doing that in Gaza, and they're not doing it because of exactly the way Hamas has planned for this war to unfold. They placed their hundreds of miles of tunnels under hospitals and schools and mosques and residences, and they put weapons depots in civilian infrastructure so that exactly when Israel would have to respond to the enormous attack that took place on October 7th, enormous destruction would take place and many casualties would take place and many children and women and others would be caught in the crossfire because that is exactly the way Hamas planned it. And having command centers in hospitals so that when Israel attacks those command centers, you have Israel destroying a hospital and the world is in horror, is horrified. And so how Israel could have done this in a different way, I suppose if Israel had thousands of agents in Gaza and could somehow surgically find all of these people, and they had some fantastical mechanism to discover tunnels buried hundreds of feet under the ground, and they could somehow eliminate those without killing the people above, great. But I don't think that magic exists. So Israel had no choice but a very forceful, very brutal reaction to the atrocities of October 7th. Um, we would like it to end sooner rather than later. The Israeli public, of course, is, as you know, divided over this question. What is our priority, to get the hostages out or to eliminate the threat posed by Hamas? And that's a balance that is a very difficult balance to obtain, to ascertain. Um, Israel is searching for a way to end this war so that it never has to face the threat of Hamas terror again, and also that it can get its people home, living and dead. And I have enormous sympathy for the complexity of the challenges that the Israeli government faces. But I don't think the world has patience for that. They see images on TV every day, and they feel that Israel is being brutal, and they don't understand the backstory and the reason why Israel's reaction has to be as fierce and as comprehensive as it has been over the last 2 years.
So when you are talking about, the world is reacting to what they are seeing on TV, how much of this is actually Hamas propaganda? Say, for example, starvation in Gaza, and how much of this is actually real? I would believe that, I mean, the starvation factor where children are being starved, that is the message that has been given to the world, and that has triggered the latest, policy decisions that these countries have taken.
I think you're right. And I must tell you, I've talked to a lot of people, including people involved in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which, as you know, was set up by Israel and the United States to provide humanitarian support because of the enormous dissatisfaction with the UN mechanisms, which were being regularly looted by and other international agencies, humanitarian support, which was being typically looted by Hamas fighters and other gangs, and the aid would then be sold and profiting these gangs and Hamas. And so Israel tried to set up a different mechanism. I have been told by Israeli officials that there is no starvation in Gaza. Now, it is very clear from all the pictures that are not necessarily from Hamas photographers and videographers being supplied to Western media, but are from international agencies that actually have people on the ground, that there is enormous hardship in Gaza and suffering. It's very clear, and terrible medical stories that one hears. There's no doubt that the Palestinian people are suffering grievously from what's happening. But we all know why that's happening. It's happening because this could end tomorrow if Hamas stopped its war against Israel and released the hostages, laid down its arms, and recognized that they have been defeated militarily. But they won't do that. Um, so I don't know how much what we are seeing is Hamas propaganda, how much is exaggerated. There's also, of course, it's difficult for many outside media to get into Gaza because it's a war zone. And so a lot of what we are seeing is definitely being filtered through the lenses of people who are working with or for or are afraid of Hamas, and therefore they're tailoring their coverage in that particular way. But terrible things are happening. We need to end this as quickly as possible.
So, how does all this affect the signing of a possible second Abraham Accord in terms of, or rather, how does it help or does not help? Are we going to witness some kind of a normalization of Israel's relations with the Arab world, particularly Saudi Arabia, in this context?
Well, look, I have to say that the countries in 2020 that agreed to normalize relations with Israel, the United Arab Emirates made the decision in August of 2020, Bahrain, the Kingdom of Bahrain in September of 2020, the signing on the White House lawn was September 15th of 2020, and then in December, the Kingdom of Morocco also agreed to normalize with Israel for mutual benefit for these countries, their own populations, their own progress, their own futures, to have a partnership with Israel for security, for sharing of medical technology and irrigation technology and other agricultural technologies, and a whole range of subjects in which all sides could benefit. And it's been a success. But because of the war over the last almost 2 years now, no one talks about it very much publicly. The populations in these countries want to see an end to the war. They feel the suffering of the Palestinian people, and they cannot be told at this point how important it is to their countries to maintain these relations. But the leaders of these countries recognize that it is in their long-term strategic interest to maintain the relationship with Israel. And so we have, because of the vision and the courage and the wisdom of the leaders of Morocco and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, these relationships have continued, but they're under strain. The possibility of going beyond these three countries to Saudi Arabia, as you say, is complicated by the continuation of the war. There's no question. I've had the opportunity with AJC colleagues to have many consultations with Saudi officials over the last 2 years and with others across the region. And I know that the desire remains. The desire to have a relationship with Israel remains. But they do not feel that they can advance until there is an end to the war, until there is a clear political pathway for the Palestinian people so that they have the progress, the prospect of independent self-governance. And that's not on order right now. That is in the future. I expect that we'll get back to that once the war is over, once there's a successful effective, comprehensive day after plan, which we haven't yet seen. But there are people who are trying to shape that, including from the Trump administration. And I'm hopeful that we will get to that point, and then we'll get back on the track that we were on in 2023, when we were clearly moving in that direction. And it was made very clear to me that by Saudi officials that once there is normalization between Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the whole dynamic in the region will change, and the whole dynamic of frankly, of the Muslim world will change. Saudi Arabia, given its position in not only the League of Arab States but in the Organization of Islamic Conference, will be very significant if you see that breakthrough, and that would be consistent with, frankly, the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which laid out the prospect of Palestinian statehood going in parallel with the full recognition of Israel, full acceptance of Israel across not only the Arab world, but the larger Muslim majority world. I'm hoping that that's the direction we'll return to. We're not there now. There is not political support in Israel for a Palestinian state, as you have seen with abundant clarity and in recent days especially, because of the feeling of insecurity that the Israeli public has, the lack of trust in the prospect of a successful Palestinian state that will not continue to pose a terror threat to Israel. If we can get beyond that, if we can build that trust, which will take time, and if we can build institutions, self-governing institutions for the Palestinians, I think you will see a change in the attitude of democratic Israel toward the possibility of Palestinian self-governance that does not threaten Israel. It will take the help of the Palestinians' friends in the Arab world and in the wider world as well to help shape that new governing structure that provides for a successful future for the Palestinian population. I believe that we'll get there. It's a long process, and I would hope that the world would have more patience, although I know patience is in short supply these days on many fronts. And I also know that, the world has a kind of a special, I think, a special attitude toward Israel, especially high demands, kind of a different standard that is applied to Israel, expecting greater patience, greater tolerance of risk. And it's asking a lot of a people that throughout history have often been subject to enormous persecution and discrimination and violence. And I'm hopeful that the world will take a breath and recognize that Israel is trying hard to defend itself, but also wants to live at peace with its neighbors, and as a good neighbor.
Yeah. Now, okay, this brings me to the agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. I mean, at least Pakistan, in talking in terms of this is for the Palestinian people, this is a protection, bringing Saudi Arabia under the nuclear umbrella to protect it from Israel and Israel's quote-unquote aggression, because I think in this case, the attack on the Hamas headquarters in Qatar, they are talking about. Which way are things headed with Pakistan coming into the equation. And Pakistan is constantly talking about, Palestinian people, the Palestinian people.
You know, um, I'm trying to figure it out myself, Jade, and my sense is um, that when things are going badly in your country, there is economic hardship, there are security issues, um, there's dissatisfaction with the government on a variety of fronts, educational system, healthcare system, you name it. It's really convenient to be able to point to a common enemy and to rile up your population to focus on that common enemy, that scapegoat. And Israel has served in that function for many years across the region, wider region. And so I remember years ago, 20, 25, 30 years ago, visiting countries in the Arab world where, the front page of the newspaper every day was dominated by stories of the horrors that were taking place against Palestinians in occupied West Bank and in occupied Jerusalem. These were the headlines. And it was really convenient for Arab leaders to showcase these horrors because they were stealing their people blind and they were diverting resources in the most outrageous ways. And they didn't want people to talk about that. They wanted people to talk about those horrible Jews and what they're doing to our Palestinian brothers. And I think it's a similar phenomenon. The region has grown up since then, has changed since then. You don't see those headlines necessarily across the Arab world that you used to see 15 or 20 or 30 years ago. There's a greater recognition in the Arab world that Israel is a part of that region and can contribute to that region. They're upset with the conduct of the war in Gaza, but there is widespread recognition in Arab capitals that the future of the region will be improved if they have a relationship with Israel. They know that. And many have benefited privately with security and intelligence arrangements even before the establishment of normal relations. And we know that as well. That lesson hasn't necessarily been adopted by some other countries, where it is still very convenient to try to focus on the Palestinian crisis to deflect attention from the ongoing misery that is being inflicted on a population because of bad governance, military dictatorships, and other issues. So I explained it that way for primarily. I don't think that this Saudi-Pakistani deal represents a reorientation in Saudi policy toward the region, in Saudi relations with India, which are strong and have been strong for years. I think it's mostly about, first of all, for the Saudis, if I can understand correctly, their own position in the wider Muslim world, their leadership in the Muslim world, Muslim majority among Muslim majority countries in the OIC, and without compromising the strategic partnerships that they've long enjoyed, the economic partnerships they've long enjoyed with India. And yes, to what extent was this triggered by the attack on Hamas offices in Doha by Israel a few weeks ago? To what extent is it driven by internal Pakistani politics? I think these are all considerations, but I think it would be probably a mistake to kind of overinterpret this.
Could it also be a reaction or rather preemptive action against Iran going nuclear? Is that Iran factor also coming into play?
Yeah, I believe I'm sorry that I didn't point that out earlier. Yes, of course. I mean, the Saudis have had a very complicated arrangement with the Iranians. You know that there was this deal that was brokered by China that established some kind of a regular contact. I wouldn't exaggerate the warmth of the relationship, but I think the Saudis want to have some kind of a normal relationship with Iran to the extent that they can. And that will give them some leverage. And to have Pakistan, a nuclear power on the other side of Iran, in a more of a defined partnership with Saudi Arabia, does give them yet another tool to work with. So yes, I think the continuing Iranian threat, which hasn't been eliminated because of the actions that were taken by Israel and the United States a couple of months ago, but has been weakened, but hasn't been eliminated. I think the Saudis are wise to kind of put as many cards on the table for themselves as they possibly can.
Okay, Jason, if we now can talk a little bit about the India-US relations. I must tell viewers that AJC came out with a statement, supporting strong India-US relations. Thank you for that. And what do you think is going wrong?
Well, we live in strange times. And you, of course, saw President Trump's speech in the United Nations on Tuesday, and which was kind of all over the place, and I think was not necessarily the clearest reflection of American policy toward the world, toward UN institutions, toward our friends around the world. But I look at the action at what actually is happening. Yes, there were statements made a few weeks ago by Peter Navarro, the trade advisor to the president, and some strange statements that came out of the president himself about India. Um, but the relationship is strong, and we have seen, I wouldn't say a walk back, but a reassertion of the importance of that relationship by the president himself, not many days ago. And of course, very warm comments by Prime Minister Modi as well toward the United States, toward the president in particular. I think that again, I wouldn't exaggerate the importance of the really outrageous statements that were made by Peter Navarro about Modi's war in Ukraine, which was insane, and my organization felt that we had to say something in defense of India, which is not prompting or primarily fueling the war in Ukraine. We would like to see India reduce its consumption of Russian oil. Of course, we believe that the Russian aggression against Ukraine is horrific and needs to be stopped, and that anything that gives the Russians the resources to conduct the war is a mistake. And we would like to see an end to that. And I know the administration feels very strongly about that as well. We heard it again from the president at the United Nations. Um, but the basis, the underlying basis, the strategic rationale for the relationship between the United States and India is just as powerful as it has always been. And the trajectory of that relationship, which has been, going up for decades now, from George W. Bush, from Barack Obama, from Joe Biden, from Donald Trump in his first term, and the personal relationship between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi. We saw on display repeatedly in Texas, in Washington, and elsewhere as well, of course. So I believe that we'll be back on track. I think we're going to see other indications in the coming days of the importance of the relationship to the president. But from an American public perspective, our relationship with our Indian American friends has never been stronger. Our solidarity in these between these two communities in support of the U.S.-India relationship has never been stronger. And we also are grateful for and really cognizant of the importance of the relationship between India and the State of Israel, which has been consistent. And I must also tell you, speaking to you on a Jewish holiday, Rosh Hashanah, the new year for the Jewish people, seeing the messages that were sent by the president of India to the president of Israel, by the prime minister of India to the prime minister of Israel, to the Jewish people, really also warmed my heart. And I think I would be remiss if I failed to mention that.
Yeah. Now, when you're talking about that, people to people relations and all, what we are witnessing, at least on social media, particularly X, I mean, it is all out racism against India, and much of it coming from President Trump's base, what is known as the MAGA, Make America Great Again. So, and apart from that, I mean, while we say that the relationship is important, but what really matters to us are things like that 50% tariff, the kind of, hurdles that are being erected when it comes to H-1B visa. So all these
Yeah.
things have a huge impact. Do you see any chance of these aspects improving?
Yeah, I hope so. I also was really shocked by that huge increase in the fees and the clampdown on H-1Bs, and of course the 50% tariff, which we've had a chance to talk about in the past, Joyeeta. Um, Look, I also know that this is an administration that believes in renegotiating deals. This president, throughout his business career and in office, has shown that again and again and again. So I won't be surprised if there is a further discussion between. There have been ongoing discussions, as you know, between India and U.S. Trade negotiators, and I expect that there's a prospect that we'll see a change in that number. I hope so because it's outrageous.
Yeah, but I hope, I mean, as an Indian, and that is the buzz over here as well, let us hope that people like, say, Howard Lutnick and all can be reined in by the president, because they are causing immense harm to, I mean, they are jeopardizing India-US relations, because the public opinion here is turning really against the US. How do we, so, and
Uh, uh,
especially as I talked about the MAGA base.
yeah, I'm very concerned about that as well. And look, as a community that has its own issues with parts of that base that will routinely say the most outrageous things about our people, about uh, Jews who happen to be somehow connected to liberal causes and are therefore, agents of Satan. I mean, it's insane and it's dangerous, and it could lead to violence, and it has led to violence. And so yes, there are extremists on all sides, but the extremists in that base really need to be addressed. And I hope that we'll be seeing signals as cooler heads prevail from leaders of that movement that will change the situation. But I recognize the danger that you're describing, and it's a danger that is posed to my minority community as well.
Yes, because the buzz now is that, Hindus in the US are the new Jews, because that is the kind of attack that they're facing.
Yeah, that's horrifying. And we will continue to work with our Indian American partners. We are creating new mechanisms, even as we speak, to make sure that we're coordinated and we are sharing techniques and information and working together with elected officials as well, who are very sympathetic to push back against these messages of hate.
Okay, my last question, Jason. Do you see any particular timeline or time period by which you think India-US relations can get back to normal, maybe inside the next 1 year? Uh, if President Trump does not do that well in the midterm elections, or is it, or will India have to wait? India will have to wait for until the next president comes in. I know
No,
it's.
um, as I said earlier, Ajita, we live in strange times, and we live in a time when we have a U.S. administration that can blow hot and cold in the space of a few hours. Um, I believe that in his heart, the president recognizes the enormous benefit of the relationship between the United States and India, a sister democracy, the world's two greatest democracies, and with the strategic considerations that India presents to the United States vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis other parts of the world, but especially China. That has not been lost on this administration in the past. This was an administration that understood in the first administration, the first Trump administration, the benefit of that Indo-Pacific partnership with the United States, the orientation by the U.S. Military toward that theater, and the role that India would continue to play. And the natural benefits of two democracies working together, and the resources of India, the labor of India, the ingenuity of India, all is, I think, understood by many in this administration and by the president himself. And I'm hopeful that we'll be back on that track. But politics is a strange business, and it's a long game. And I believe that if what we saw over the last 20 or so years with increasing friendship and really partnership between India and the United States, coming out of the Cold War, entering a new era. Um, I believe that the realities are not lost on anyone who's active in American leadership, and whether it's this president or the next president, that trajectory will continue.
Thank you, Jason, so much. On that hopeful note, I'm going to end this program. Thank you, Jason, for coming to this show.
Always good to be with you. Thank you, Judy.
And thank you, viewers, for watching. Until the next time.